Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ask a Pro, the webinar series where we feature people that really know a lot about accessory dwelling units. My name is David Donahue. I'm the host, and we are going to do a very deep dive with our panelist, Steve Vallejos, today. And I think I have some pretty fun questions. Before the recording, he and I just kind of did a little brief orientation, and I know this is going to be fun. For those of you who are, watching live or going to be watching this recording, please, kind of put it, if it is a recording, it'll be on YouTube. So then just put in any sort of questions you may have if you weren't able to ask them live, and then I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. And then just a little bit of information about best practices for those who are going to be joining us live. Just put those into the Q&A. I will be trying to pay attention to the chat, but sometimes I don't get to it as quickly as I would like to. And let's see. Yeah. So, Steve, thank you very much for taking the time. I know and to join us. You are super busy all the time. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. I first heard about what your company is doing, and I'm purposely not going to be saying who it is because we want to keep things unbranded. But I heard about you about 4 years ago when I started to get into the accessory dwelling unit space. And as somebody who has really developed a program and a process of accessory dwelling units, not only in the way that you have them constructed and built, but that you had been advocating with not only in your local jurisdiction, and you're in Northern California, around just in Fairfield, just a little bit east of San Francisco and Oakland and all those, and San Jose, those huge cities. But that you were also advocating to people in Sacramento, so the state assembly members, state senators, about how to make ADUs more readily available, less restrictions. And I would just kind of love to hear your perspective of how all that kind of originated, back then.
Oh wow, that's a big ask.
I know. We have an hour.
I've been doing this for 16 years. So a lot of that came about through challenges we were having with a lot of local cities doing ADUs in the early years. And several organizations in the media came to me about what's working, what's not working. And that led down the road of considering taking the battle from cities to the state to try and clean up legislation so that it's easier. And so it's a collection of 10 plus, roughly about 10 years turned into some ideas about cleanups that could be put into legislation. And myself and an advocacy group and certain organizations like AARP brought ideas forward to wonderful ears in the Senate, and new bills were presented, and from a standpoint of the outside world's perception of the industry, those pieces of legislation kicked off removal of barriers in like 2017, when we started to see the industry kind of proliferate and more new players come into the space. And then that subsequently kicked off, things are going so well, what other ask could we put out there, and can we get bills that make corrections, and so it set off a series of these bills that removed a lot of barriers and opened up the market for a lot of people to join the space, which means opened up the market for a lot of homeowners to consider an ADU when locally it might not have been something that was attainable.
And I want to kind of focus on that just a little bit more. You had been running kind of into roadblocks with your local cities and counties, and then keep running into roadblocks, and then you then started the conversation at the state level, the assembly members, senators, and like you just mentioned, they started to kind of have an interest in, okay, how can we improve, accessibility, permitting for ADUs, and at the same time kind of build out and provide additional housing. And I think that that's interesting because that is the main reason why we have the laws that we do in the state of California, is because from the top down they said, you are going to do this, and we're not going to leave it to you to arbitrarily make a decision on it.
Yeah, what's funny about this whole thing is that I've had a long enough window to have a lot of my views changed. When you first get into a space like this, you're just a guy or a gal with a set of plans trying to submit them to a city. So you're on opposite ends of the table, and you're in some regards you're adversaries. They're the gatekeepers to making sure whatever you're submitting is correct and to code and is safe. And you're on the other end, like, what can I do? And can you tear down some of these barriers? Stop putting up so many roadblocks. And what you find out over the years is that the people that you're working with at the counter, they're not the ones creating those local regulations. They're just the enforcers of them. And so you start seeing the tiering of all of this, and you find out that the people who are working together on this in that almost adversarial structure, they both have their set of problems in what they're dealing with a whole new set of rules and a whole new type of housing coming into their world. So as I started to dig into legislation, and then also spending more time working with cities to try and talk to them and learn about what their barriers and burdens are, you start to see a need for a little bit more of a collaborative effort. The thing that happens with the state legislation is it balances out a couple of different things. It balances out, there are jurisdictions that just are not in favor of this, and for whatever reason, this is considered as a problem to them and their community. And then there's other jurisdictions that just are they're dealing with constant code changes, constant onslaught of permit requests from different variations of things, commercial, residential, all these different things.
Right.
So they're just having their issues are more about adapting to a changing environment, not necessarily that they're adversaries or that they're against it. So when you learn those things, you find out the value of a statewide legislation cleanup on things that we're seeing are barriers in not just one jurisdiction, but across a lot of them. That's where the state becomes helpful to break down that barrier, so you don't have to battle them here and win, and then go over to the next city to find out, I got to battle that same thing again. So that's where the state side of it comes in, but the local side, it's important to learn to see things from their point of view as well, so that we can understand their problems and challenges, and if there is a barrier that's there, why is that barrier there? For instance, there could be a strange barrier that showed up in a jurisdiction a long time ago, a few years back actually, where if they had any adjoining street to them that was that's 20 feet wide or less, that they were going to be pulled off of a viable location for an ADU. And turns out, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but it turns out the city has a lot of these streets that are 20 feet wide or less, and some of them are private lanes and such. And you look at it from the ADU building and the homeowner perspective, like if a 350 square foot ADU and somebody parks a Prius out front of it, where are my issues? That's not the issue. California as a whole, issues are fires. We are a burning state. We for some reason, housing burning as well as forest burning is a big thing here. So yeah, if we're putting more housing on these streets and we're burdening um, uh, life and rescue services from being able to adequately support health and safety, then it's a valid concern. And granted, when you look at these 20-foot wides, yeah, can you get a fire engine down it? Sure, if there's nothing parked on it. But if coming into it and turning and having to do that under duress of a fire, smoke, flames, there starts to tear into there things of like, okay, there's some validity to this, and now I understand it from my side of the world, and now I can actually articulate that to a consumer. And now I'm not going to go to the state and say, hey, we got a city pushing for something just because they don't want ADUs. So it's that kind of stuff where the industry as a whole needs to learn how to push pull against each other so that we understand things from all sides.
And I think that I think I heard you on one of when you were being interviewed, or I forget where I heard you say it. I think somebody was asking about what's the next piece of legislation that should come down to make it easier. And I think that your comment was, we just need to see what the existing rules, codes, regulations are. So as you just mentioned, you as a builder, provider of ADUs, working with the permitting departments, planning departments, can have that kind of push pull to see what does work, and are there issues, as you mentioned, about the accessibility with the fire truck and the infrastructure and the burdening of that are legitimate, and to give it a year or two just to see how things just kind of mesh and kind of come together.
Yeah, I mean, if you take it from, look, we had a lot of barriers for sure, and some of the work that's been done is amazing to tear down some of those barriers. But in that means that it's a statewide rollout of rule changes, and that means every local ordinance has to go through and change. And it's not a single item. When, like in 2020, I think we released like six or seven new bills that were ADU related bills, and they collectively changed a lot of things. We also have energy code changes every couple of years, building code changes periodically, sometimes every couple of years, but every now and then there's amendments every year. So you layer all these things in, and for a local jurisdiction, it's a lot of adjustments to make in their own ordinances and their own interpretation of those ordinances, so that they can effectively understand how to view submittals and overlay that information to make sure they're doing it correctly. In the end, my exact words to the ask was, what should we do next for legislation? And I said, nothing. Let's leave it alone for a little while, and let's give these cities and counties a little period of time to acclimate. And with that, we'll get a year or so of good feedback as to what's working and not working, and whether that becomes an issue of just clarity in definitions coming from housing and community development, HCD, that kind of the people responsible for making sure that the cities and counties administer the information correctly, or whether there's a need for a code change. But to back off now is to give a little room for everybody to acclimate and see what we can do with what we have, rather than constantly say it needs to be better, it needs to be better, it needs to be better.
You said something that's going to dovetail very nicely into my next question, which is, first of all, Greg Nicholas, who was head of the HCD, their ADU program, has retired. So Greg was fantastic. We had him on Ask a Pro several weeks ago with a couple other gentlemen, and he was just fantastic. So he is going to be missed. Greg Nicholas will be missed. But it's the energy codes, because you have been a strong advocate against against the Title 24 requirements on ADUs below a certain square footage. Because if you have, the smaller that the ADU gets, let's say a standard window stays the same size, ADU gets smaller, window same size, then you have this more opening that more sun can come in, and then it triggers some sort of T24 calculation, energy efficiency calculations, where the roof may have to have an R54 or something in it. And then you're talking about letting the jurisdictions kind of get used to everything. I'm not associated with this company, but I'm going to mention them because they've been doing a tremendous amount of work with this, and that's Symbium. Symbium has been doing phenomenal efforts to try to automate and integrate within and have a system that brings into a jurisdiction mechanisms that remove the legacy systems of building and planning and then try to automate them.
Yeah, Symbium's a great group. They have two missions that they work simultaneously. One is providing a consumer interface that overlays local building code ordinances such that you can it's easier for you to ascertain whether an ADU is viable on your property or not, and through various sizes, through plans that are manufacturers who taken on the task of working with them directly and sharing their plans to Symbium, as well as just giving the homeowner the ability to sketch out, a footprint of something that they want on their own. That's their consumer interface side, and that's tremendous. It's a very daunting task for a consumer to understand how to read zoning rules and understand building code, and it's written like law. And so for the average consumer, that's just not something that they read every day. Then the flip side of that is they're working with the cities and counties themselves to help them utilize this information in ways to better determine what physically can be done within their cities. And it's a rare organization to take on something like that. It's almost as if they're like the Google of ADU and permitting world with what they're doing. They're taking all this, they're collectively compiling all this knowledge into a tool that helps you assess ability much easier.
And with that, that's the reason that we feature them on our website as a resource. It's what we do when we talk to clients about the feasibility side of it, and we can interact very easily, very quickly. So I think they're doing wonderful work, and I do hope it is you're correct with the comparison to Google, because it would be fantastic if the state of California, at least the state of California, can a few jurisdictions can adopt Symbium in their automation. I think it'll make it easier for everybody. And Ken, before we go on to the next topic, can you talk a little bit about what your work is on the energy code changes?
That's a constant moving target and a work in progress. It's a moving target because no sooner than they adapt the code based on certain rules, they're right at it again, looking at the next wave. And so, and every 2 years they put out a new energy code requirement based on, their interpretation. But to put it simply, the way the energy code was designed, it's designed to, for like layman terms, the Title 24 Energy Code is an application that allows you to look at a new construction, whether it's an addition or a brand new home, and based on the footprint of the home, the climate zone that it resides in, and the positioning of the home, north, south, east, west, gives you the ability to determine whether it meets the state standard for energy efficiency. And so there's lots of parameters and lots of ups and downs, push pulls. There's some calculations on what standard window glass siding is per side, with the understanding of like west facing is like one of the ones where they're trying to limit it, obviously, because afternoon sun is significant western facing glass. So they actually cut the percentage of glass allowed on that side. But there's a lot of different parameters in there, and ultimately they kick back you plug in the information, they kick back a reading as to what your insulation value should be, what your energy performance should be for your windows. It even goes down into, like, depending on what's going on there, it kicking back either heightened requirements or lesser requirements on the appliances, everything from your water heater to your furnace to even your appliances you use, in your kitchen and, your washer dryer, those types of things. So there's a lot of things, air quality, all of that is all tied into the California Energy Code, Title 24. So that's the overview. The general rule is that the system was designed for homes in the 1,000, 1,500 square foot and up. So generally the rule would be, as the house gets bigger, and we're looking at scenarios where you could be in a really big house with little occupants and maybe 1 to 2 occupants, the energy demand is going to be significant, even though the occupancy levels are really low. That's where we've got to be in concern about energy conservation. So they push into higher energy conservation elements, the higher insulation value, higher performing windows, better performance on furnaces and water heaters, that kind of stuff. The problem was these systems weren't designed for smaller ADUs.
Right.
So as we go down into the smaller ADU, we find that we're jumping into performance requirements that exceed giant homes, and we fall into other areas where the extrapolation calculation requirements on glass doesn't work well, because as our spaces get really small like that, there's a general desire to actually have a little bit more glass, so you don't feel like you're inside a little tiny box without any windows. But we've joked about this on some of these small units. If the west facing wall is somewhere where it's my only wall actually to put glass, because I may be up against a fence and some trees and some other things, the general rule is 5% of the wall. So we've joked about this, and like, we do it jokingly, but like picking at it, saying like, hey, so if I have to do an egress window on this side of the house, I literally can't make that window meet code for egress because I'm not allowed to have that much glass. So what do I do in that bedroom to make legal egress? So we get into these scenarios of the push-pull between the energy code and other codes, and how these things have to mesh better, and they don't fit well with ADUs. So we've actually graduated to a point. This was a problem dating back to 2016. We graduated to the point where they're finally saying, we hear you with your small homes. Let's try and figure out how we can do this better for what you're doing, but not change the whole code and the system so that we have to have dual calculating systems. And so there's a lot of dialogue happening, and we're hoping that it'll lead to lessening some of the performance requirements, because at the end of the day, these small homes with very limited occupancy, they're energy efficient by design. They're not energy pigs. And our new code is such that we've overlaid all of our green building codes that were thought of as advanced things only on higher end homes in like 2016. They've now become part of our regular code. So we are doing way better now with just our standard code. We're energy efficient by design.
Before I jump into this next thing, I know that for some of you, there's some audio kind of feedback. I know that when I'm talking, I don't hear it now. So it's hopefully improved. Thank you, Leslie, who made that comment. I appreciate that. So please bear with us if it comes back. Sorry about it. The energy code thing that I always find kind of fascinating is that what's in place, and I think that you touched on it when you said it was typically designed for homes at 1,000 square feet or bigger. But as you come down to a smaller ADU, with the reach codes or the current codes where they have to be all electric. I mean, Steve, come on. A 40-gallon electric heat pump water heater that is a massive piece of equipment. I mean, I remember when I was working on my ADU and I was thinking that, I'm going to have a gas, on-demand gas, sit on the outside of the house. It's like this big. It's tiny. And then I said, no, I need to go all electric and have solar so I can show and have an example. And then we're doing a 734 square foot, 1 bedroom, 1 bath ADU and on property, and it's under construction right now. And the space, the footprint that it took out of our closet is huge. And so you think about this, we're doing a big one. 734 is big. But if you're doing 350 or 288, because I've seen some of your plans that you have, and I think we were talking once that the most popular are around that 300 range, give or take. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to put an electric hot water heater pump, heat pump, water heater into that ADU, if you were going to go into that footprint and not outside with a closet, which I think you can, it's taking up a lot of space, useful space. So that's, to me, is a big disconnect.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't understand what he's talking about, his transition from a small gas tankless water heater, the question comes up, well, then just switch to an electric tankless water heater. Well, physically, yeah, that's an easy thing to do. Code-wise, it's not. They don't pass the energy code. Those small electric tankless water heaters are considered energy pigs, and when you try using them, it throws the energy calculation so far out of whack that there's no offset. You can't, no amount of insulation, no amount of higher performance appliances or other things offset it. So it basically just becomes, it's something that you cannot use. So that product is a wonderful product, but it doesn't work in California. So then that pushes you to what David was talking about. It pushes you to a thing called a heat pump water heater, where it's basically a tank style water heater. So you're back to something that looks like a conventional 40-gallon, 50-gallon water heater, but it has an electric heat pump system on top. It's not gas fired. It has this system on top, and it is the only thing that works when you are all electric. So when you go to a smaller unit, you're forced to figure out where to put this thing. And my joke to the Energy Commission and everybody else is, if you have to accommodate for everything, that means that you're looking at the giant homes, but you're not looking all the way down to where we go. The building code allows us to go all the way down to 150 square feet, which is the smallest considered habitable space. It's called an efficiency unit. So that's a small little studio. And in that scenario, we are basically being told to put a 40-gallon water heater in a 150 square foot studio. And the 40-gallon water heater requires a 3x3 closet with a door. So you're basically taking up 9 square feet, usually a little bit more because the walls of the closet take up a little bit more. So yeah, you're usually about 10 or 11 square feet of your 150 square feet are being given up for a water heater. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but this is what we're stuck with. There's no offset to, this is my other thing I'm trying to work with them about is, well, what if I went to a net zero home and I put enough solar either on the ADU or on the main house to wipe out whatever energy I'm using? So let's get that tankless electrical water heater back in the program. And I tell you, I don't care how much energy it takes, because I'll put solar up to offset it. So it's still a zero energy home. There's no offset for that. You only get so much credit for doing solar. You could put a solar system that generates enough power for your entire block. You're not going to get any additional credits for it. So there's some things in the code that are generally looked at as good ideas to clean up the system overall, but we still have to go a little further to make sure that it works everywhere.
And to that too, just a little bit of sort of context, because I had not done that yet in our conversation. Your company is regarded as, first of all, the pioneer of accessory dwelling units in the state. We started early in the conversation. I know some people have just joined us. Thank you. That you've helped with the legislation to kind of get the codes and things changed. But the qualifier is, you've been doing this for so long, and you've been doing it, and you've done so many. Is it correct to say that you've done the most ADUs in the state of California? And then if that's true, wouldn't that also be you've done the most ADUs in the United States?
There's a time I could easily say yes to you, but it's harder for me to keep track of now. And I don't, I mean, I haven't seen anybody put out any statistics that show that, that they've done more than us in a period of time. So I don't, I mean, I can't just sit here and in all honesty say, yeah, absolutely, we've done more than anybody. A couple of years back, yeah, that was an easy statement to make. But now I'm not so sure. I don't know what everybody else is doing out there. There's certainly some well-funded companies out there in this space now, doing their best to do massive advertising campaigns on a lot of people. So I don't know how that's translating to their physical activity. But yeah, I mean, for us now, we're somewhere in between 250 and 300 completed across a wide array of jurisdictions and customer profiles and physical environments and things. So yeah, we have a very broad sense of what this market is, and also not just the numbers, but over the time, we've watched the evolution of the market and the evolution of the consumer.
Right. Because people are becoming much more aware. I know that a lot of people are joining from the Facebook group How to ADU. Ryan O'Connell, he's doing amazing work just trying to have a safe place, protected place where people can ask questions, because now more and more people are doing them. They've seen their neighbors complete one or start one, and they are now becoming interested themselves. My next question is going to be, again, we were leading right into it. The marketplace has really been flooded with ADU providers, ADU experts, and they're pontificating that they have the answer and they have the solution. At times when I've looked at them, I will see that they're not really providing a permittable ADU. And I'm going kind of off to one direction, with the tiny homes or the cabin homes. And I did talk about that when I had Greg Nicholas and some other people talk about my concerns and their concerns about what tiny homes, or what they're calling modular, which in our definition you wouldn't want to call modular an RV, and the names of them and the definitions get kind of tied up. And so I just wanted to kind of, if people are listening and the ones that are watching and you're thinking about getting an ADU and you're out there and you're looking at all of these things that are just coming at you a million miles an hour, what would be your advice to somebody to try to find their way through all the noise?
You hit on a lot of different trigger points and pain points there. So I'll try and break them down in terms of a response. I'll start with just the basics of a whole bunch of people who are ADU experts now telling you they've got the best product for you, and it's the best price, and whatever their I'm the best scenario is that they're pitching. I think people need to approach this with a lot more scrutiny than they do small purchases. This is not a small purchase, and this is in some regards it's a marriage for a period of time. So whoever you're talking to, this translates into a contract, which translates to them being on your personal property with you for a while. So with that, use some good common sense about how you do this. The thing I tell people up front is you have a responsibility on your end in terms of making this something that goes smooth for yourself. It starts with being clear about what you want. The more you waffle all over the place on product size, finishes, all of these different things, the more you're being evasive to clarity from your service or your products supplier. So that means that you're putting them in a situation where they're going to be doing something called a budget allocation. Don't do that. Stay away from those. Pick your finishes, make your decisions. The more decisions you make up front, the more realistic your chances are of landing an actual cost that corresponds with the contract cost. If you go about it of, I'm in a hurry, let's get this done, give me some plans and a budget, and we'll work out those details during construction, you can do that. This is why construction industry always tells you to keep a contingency budget of anywhere between 5 to 25%. Some even say more. It depends on your clarity or lack of clarity on the front end. So those are the things that you have responsibility for. The next step of responsibility you have is seeking out validation. If somebody is making promises, try and find ways of validating that through references. References that you can call on that are actually completed projects, and ask the important questions. Was the number they gave me the actual, the number they gave you was the actual cost to build? Was the time duration they talked about the time duration for the build? What other things would you say I should look out for? I mean, those are the things that make you come to a wise decision. That's just a general rule of thumb. I don't care what it is, whether you're having somebody build you a fence or whether you're having somebody build you a house. Those rules still apply no matter what. On the other side, you were talking about the tiny homes movement. Yes. And things that fall into a gray area in the modular or the manufactured world. All of these things on the prefab side of the house are very unclear to the consumer. And quite honestly, it's still honestly very unclear to a lot of the industry professionals as well. So my take on that personally is manufactured homes are a great option so long as you understand that they don't always give you the same clarity or on what the outcome will be on the resale value, because depending on the mortgage side, the bank or institution for the buyer or a refi, they have different views of that. So you want to take that in consideration. There may be some cost savings, there may be some time savings up front, but if ultimately they impact your true value at the back end, then you want to be aware of that up front. Maybe it's not an issue for you, but be aware of it. Learn the difference between manufactured, modular, and tiny homes. They're three different things. Manufactured home is a federally coded home, so it's under the federal program. A modular home is actually, it's a state approved plan, but it's actually built to the local building code. So we're still kind of tied into what is considered almost a conventional home. Tiny homes are basically what David said, is they're an RV. They're an RV that looks like a house. And so they're in a whole different code set. They don't adhere to any of the building code. They're not on a permanent foundation. They don't have the same hallway, bathroom size configurations. That they're not inspected offsite or onsite for proper electrical, plumbing, life safety things. So there's all kinds of things there that bring up the question of if you're allowed to put that on your property, is that always the best thing? And the first thing I tell people is check with your insurance, because that's going to be your dead giveaway as to whether you got something okay or not. If you put that on your property and there happens to be somebody who gets trapped and dies, or there's fire and dies, you have some sort of life safety infraction, let's call it, it becomes a question of whether your insurance is going to cover you for whatever that issue is. So you need to know that, because if your insurance basically says, no, we're just treating that as a like it was an RV parked on your property, and if somebody died in it, that's not what we cover. I don't know these things, but I say it's worth investigating. I'm not saying that your insurance won't cover that, but please don't confuse me as saying it's not covered.
Yeah,
I'm saying you understand.
So, and I think the part about tiny homes is that if a lender is looking to do an appraiser, or you're going to have to sell your property and you have a tiny home on there, it's basically chattel. Chattel is personal property. And that if you're selling your home and you have this tiny home on it in the backyard, that the lender is very likely going to have you remove it, because they're not going to fund a loan with a tiny home on it. And I think that that was an interesting kind of point. Let's see. I want to see what is the final, because we're getting close to 43, and I'm going to ask. We're about 45 minutes into it, and I want to open it up for any kind of questions that people have. So I want one more deep dive. Your company provides panel kits, and you've actually, what I've understand as I was doing some research is that you actually do panel kits that have the MEPs in them, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing. And am I correct that are you one of the only or the only company that's providing that particular product?
Yeah, I think we are. Yeah.
Okay. And what got you into the doing the panels? I mean, I know that you've been a manufactured home dealer, are a manufactured home dealer. I was looking at your Facebook page and I see where you had some crane shots of these components coming down into people's backyard. Those were fantastic. But if you could just kind of share how you kind of got into the panelized product.
So like with the evolution of the industry, we started out in rural areas and suburbs because generally those were the areas that was easiest to get an ADU because the restrictions on setbacks and lot lot utilizations and things were such that they were really the only place we could do it. So the bigger ADUs were our normal business. But as I started working on different things to tear down the legislative barriers, we found that we were getting more and more interest from urban areas, which meant that the smaller footprints became necessary. Excuse me. And so as we started getting demands for smaller and smaller footprints, the factories that provide manufactured modular products reached their cutoff of where the size is so small that it's cost prohibitive to run that down their production line, meaning their operating production line costs are greater than the value of that product. So what it meant was we had to find a different way of doing this if we wanted to continue with a prefab method. So I went to a couple of different panelized companies and we tested them out, and it's a great idea, but we weren't getting a product up to the standards that we liked, and for the relationship, I'm paying them a premium for something that they're not generating business for us. So we just decided, well, it's probably in our best interest to open our own panel factory that actually is specifically geared towards these smaller units. And so that's where the launch came from. And the idea is that we want to be able to build ADUs that have prefab as its core, but we can still go through a 3-foot wide fence to build this thing. And I don't have to battle with power lines or any of those other aspects, which means that we can work in urban areas and a lot of the areas where generally the prefab market for like modular and all those other products, their restrictions are that it's a no-fly zone for them.
I like that. No, can't crane it over. You can't get it in there.
Yeah.
And currently, your panels are going on a slab foundation. So it's a concrete foundation, and then your panels are going on to that. Correct? It's not on a raised foundation at this point.
It's actually either or. The standard plans are designed based on the standard being a slab foundation, but like right now, I think probably about at least a third of the ones we're working on right now are on raised foundations. So
is that because it's matching the current the current home that's there, or floodplains?
Yes. There's a lot of different variables for each individual consumer and their property that could put that into a demand. And so for us, it's on our side of it, we're kind of almost an irrelevant piece to us because the panel kit itself is the housing from the floor up, and it's just a question of whether you're asking us to provide the mechanism for the floor as well, or whether you're going to take that on yourself. So it's viable either way.
Which then also talk, because you've been a big advocate of being able to provide something that is a true do-it-yourself, and I find that a daunting task. Just think that somebody's going to do what I've been watching the guys in our backyard do. I mean, that's a bunch of stuff. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your plans are for your DIY program?
Yeah. So I think how do I touch on this? I'll give it two examples of being like polar opposite, but how there's somewhere in the middle that it works, and it depends on who. Are there people out there that have either physically themselves the skilled abilities to tackle the whole process, or with in their circle of friends and family members? Yeah, and that is a fully DIYable product. For us, the goal here is to in order to make it DIYable, you almost have to IKEA it, meaning that we have to do enough on the front end so that the whole thing can be done easily on the consumer side. So we have to compile all our knowledge of building, of code, of manufacturing, and all these other things, and we're a funnel. So we throw all that into this funnel, and out comes a product that is somewhat DIYable to somebody and DIYable to others. Somewhat DIYable means that, hey, there may be a lot of these functions you can do, but maybe you're just not that type of person to take on a foundation or putting together, hooking up the electrical, and that's fine. You can still DIY a lot of the functions, but maybe have a few things that are left to trades professionals. So what we're doing is we're opening up that area to be something that is up to the consumer to utilize. And we're not dictating it as much as we're opening it up for them to make the decisions on their own about what they can and can't do, and where they may or may need support services. We're taking the product further, so even the support servicers can look at this and go, wow, you really dumbed this down. Now my guys can just knock through it easily, tilt the kit up, hook the electrical together and the plumbing together, because it's all 3/4 done, and they just got to do some minor connections, as opposed to think about it and say, how do I lay out every single one of these circuits? We're doing all of that hard stuff so that the whole thing is a lot easier.
Well, I think that you're probably one of the few companies that's doing it, so I think that that's fantastic. And I understand that you also did a rollout webinar on your DIY, and I would think that anyone who's interested in an ADU would welcome any more kind of webinars that you and your team are doing, because I thought that the graphics were fantastic, the content was good. You even did a time lapse of a setup of a 150 square foot ADU, and I think you time lapsed it in about a minute, but it only took you guys about an hour and a half to put it together.
Yeah. It actually took them an hour and 10 minutes to tilt the whole thing up. So that translates to the consumer maybe taking them a day. But yeah, our skilled team, can do it in an hour. So
I think it's just fascinating. Tim had a question. How do local building departments deal with pre-wired or plumbed panels?
So there's layers to all of this. What we're doing is an open wall construction. So what you get out there is something that still goes through a normal electrical inspection process, meaning that they're looking, you get the panels, you tilt them up. These electrical connections have to be made to kind of tie all the panels together and tie them back to the main panel within the ADU. At that point, an electrical what they call a rough-in inspection happens, and that's just a normal inspection for a rough-in for electrical and plumbing as well. So there's nothing nothing there out of the ordinary to shock the inspector or confuse the inspector. There are other scenarios that we're not into yet, but we will probably close in on it maybe before this year is up, where we do something what's considered closed wall. And it's not necessarily meaning that the wall itself is closed, but we may layer in electrical and maybe there's some insulation that's covering up the electrical. Once you go to something like that, then the inspections are actually offsite. So now the inspection's happening at my facility, and when the product is brought out to the city or to your city, there's stamps and different things that go with it that tell the local inspector that inspections on certain parts of this have already happened. So that is I'm not inventing the wheel here in telling you this. This is the same rules that apply to like a modular home, where like you have two boxes that are being connected, or 4 boxes that are being connected. The building inspector knows that a lot of the inspections that were necessary happened off-site, and just the connections themselves between the boxes are happening.
Tim also is asking, no sheetrock, all trades inspection question, are all the wire and connections being made in electrical boxes?
Yeah, it's to current code, yes.
So yeah, so Tim, and everything is wide open, as because I saw a couple of, I think it was on your, I don't know where I saw the pictures, whether your Facebook or your website or one of your presentations, but everything is there and it's open so that once they get to the job site and they are put together, then you have everything is all exposed, and then the trade, whether they are the insulation or they're going to be the sheetrock, is then done on site.
Right.
The exterior finishes, and thank you for your questions, Tim. I really appreciate it. They're going to be done on site, so the exterior finish of the ADU is going to typically match. Not all the jurisdictions require that it match. I'm in Burbank. They wanted to know if we were going to match, and we said we would. So we're doing horizontal lap siding. But Steve, your experiences in Northern California, are they asking the ADU match the main house?
In the earlier years, it was pretty much everywhere was asking things to match, but nowadays we've gotten to a lot of the urban areas have removed that rule. The larger the city, the less likely you are to see that rule. We're finding it still prevalent in smaller towns and such, where there's this deep-seated desire to keep uniformity of locked in place. It's always been a strange thing to me too, because the majority of the ADUs are in backyards where they're not even visible from the front yard. So matching appearances is, it's not as big of a necessity, but I also have to remove my emotional feelings about all this, because it's whatever the local is asking for is what the consumer does. But to answer the question, these kits have had everything from horizontal siding, lap siding, stucco, steel, whatever you can get away with as an acceptable exterior finish within the city, it's applicable.
Wonderful. Again, thank you, Tim, for the questions. If anybody else has any more questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. We'll be happy to get to them. As we get close to, we have a couple more minutes left. I want to ask Steve, what is your company focused on at the moment, internally and externally? What are you guys working on for the future?
I have to continue on the pioneering mission here. So for me, it's really about reaching people who are not being reached right now. The ADU as a housing unit itself was reaching people who weren't able to do anything else. But we've only just scratched the surface on the community. Now we're trying to dive into reaching the homeowner that has very limited funds or capabilities to tap into financing options, so that we can reach and help satisfy the need for more lower income housing for those who are either homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. So for me, that's the big thing. So you brought it up when you talked about DIY, and for us, like, some of our products are designed to get you all the way down to 49% of what conventional building costs would be, depending on how much of that DIY function you want to take on. So, like, for instance, that small unit we brought up several times, the 150 square foot studio, as a full complete build in the Bay Area, that's about a $77,000 build. But as a DIY, it's about $42,000 to build. So it's that, and it's also working with the state to move away from legislation and move into funding, and start to consider either grants or loans for homeowners that are willing to provide that kind of affordable housing to their community, whether it be their family member or somebody outside their family. Those are the things that I'm focusing on now. So it's about expanding this market into places where it doesn't exist. That's the key to making this product impact things more.
I think that's we've all talked about or heard about how the state is spending billions of dollars on the housing affordability, people who are unhoused, homeless, and how some states, some cities within the state are spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on one housing unit. And I've been following your conversation for several years about how you feel that there needs to be a better way to provide affordable housing. So I think that as an industry professional in the ADU industry with ADUs, your work I think is critical to be able to kind of help push forward and push into things that is going to help all of us, not only the consumer but people who are providing accessory dwelling units. So if there are things that we can do as a community, if you could just let us know, let me know. I will be happy to support you in those efforts, because I think that those are monumental tasks and very critical tasks that need to be done. So I want to thank you for that. One last question from Tim before we wrap up was truss systems for roof. And have you done any projects for Habitat for Humanity or similar nonprofits?
Roof systems are part of the kit, whether it be trusses or rafters, depending on what you've got going. Trusses are very common for gable roofs. Rafters are very common for shed roofs. So, so as more of our ADUs get the push for being more modern looking, we go from the gable roof to a shed. And so we go to rafters in that scenario. But in either case, the materials are provided. Habitat has been a group that has pinged me over the years, lots of times from lots of different jurisdictions. And we've had good dialogue, but never really follow through on their behalf to move the needle forward and test a few projects out. I do have some curiosity surfacing again, mainly because of what we're doing now with what David says is products with MEPs, so that we're taking a lot more of the technicality out of this that may lend itself to being easier for Habitat type resources. So I venture to say over the next couple of years, we'll shift to probably doing a lot of different things with Habitat organizations or similar type organizations, where they're bringing in more unskilled resources to try and take this to the finish line. The more we can do to spell things out and make them simple for the process, the easier it is for organizations like that.
Again, Tim, thank you for your questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who has joined us live on this webinar with Steve Vallejos, the pioneer of accessory dwelling units in the state of California and very likely the United States. Has been doing wonderfully brilliant work with accessory dwelling units. I look forward to talking to you again in the future to see what kind of progress you've made. I think we have a strong community out here of people that are behind your efforts, so let us know how we can help. And thank you very much for all of your time today and all of your words of advice.
Yeah, no problem. Love being here, and it's a good round of questions. And yeah, I mean, as you get more, if they're directed towards me, let me know. I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, wonderful. Have a great day. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.